After selling over 12,000 vintage watches, Jordan and I have seen up close what works and what doesn't. We're gonna give you 6 tips for the new collector just starting their watch collecting journey and for the seasoned collector who just wants to level up a little bit. Hey everybody, Adam and Jordan here from Menta Watches. Welcome back to the channel. Before we jump in, let's do a quick wrist check. We're gonna start throwing these into the videos. What do you got on, kind sir?
I have on a Frank Mueller perpetual calendar, moon phase, that we just got in. That
I didn't even know we had that.
I think is a great size and fits my wrist very well.
And
so
there's like tremendous value in that watch. We're gonna talk about some
100%.
value buy stuff, later in this video as part of our tips, but
tremendous value.
awesome. I didn't even realize we got that.
Yes.
I am wearing actually a watch that has really grown on me a lot. We've had so many of them in.
You love those watches.
I love these watches.
Yeah.
It is a reference 6005. This one SA for stainless steel and yellow gold. The quote unquote square royal oak. It is a Audemars Piguet with a quartz movement, but with the royal oak bracelet. Beautiful size watch, so comfortable on the wrist, and because it is a quartz movement, the price kind of reflects that.
Also great value.
As compared to like automatic royal oak.
Yeah.
But let's jump right in. These are tips for people mostly starting out in their vintage watch collecting journey, but like we said, can be applied to people who have already built a collection. Just things to think about as you're considering purchasing watches, building a collection, kind of shuffling up, whatever it is. So let's start off, simply put. Tip number 1, I always explain to people when starting off to start small. Now there is a lot of nuance to that. Obviously I'm talking about money in terms of how much you're planning on spending on a watch. If you're new to the vintage game, I'd never recommend just jumping in and buying a Paul Newman for $250,000 plus. If you're interested in a vintage Daytona, start with something small so you understand what the watch is, what you like, the nuance to it, and you start with a basic 6239 that will run you in the $40,000 to $50,000 range. That's obviously a more extreme example, but there are other examples of that. If you're looking at a Rolex sports model, don't just jump straight into a big crown. Start with something simple. Start with a 5513, start with a 16800, start with something that it's not enough money that you're gonna be upset if you don't like the watch and you need to resell it.
What I find a lot of times with collectors who are just starting to collect vintage watches is that they want to jump into either the most expensive or just buy like in super high quantity. And I get it. They're very excited about the hobby and they want to, in the forum, say that, yeah, I've gotten this and this and this. But we see collectors all the time get tired of their stuff very quickly when they do that.
Well, that was the next nuance of the buy small or start small, is not just in terms of the financial aspect of it, is right. Like exactly what you just said, is that a lot of people think quantity trumps quality. And they think because they have this big collection, it's necessarily better than having a smaller, more focused collection. And I don't always agree with that. I think sometimes people just get caught up and they feel like they need to build a big collection in a short amount of time.
Yes.
And, for the obvious reasons, obviously you could make a lot of mistakes doing that and you spend a lot of money and, liquidating the collection if you need to sell is a lot harder. Putting all of that aside, it also just takes a lot of the fun out of the hunt, out of the process, out of the enjoyment of owning a watch when you can't even give yourself time to reflect and enjoy the watch you just bought because you're already on to the next one and you're building this massive collection so quickly.
Well, a lot of the big excitement is the build up from a smaller piece, like let's say a 5513 into a big crown or something like that. Like that buildup really is like what brings me personally excitement when it comes to building a watch, my personal watch collection.
And the thing is, if you've never purchased any of these watches and you jump into that big, kind of grail piece right away, you can never be sure if you're really gonna love it. So by starting small financially, money-wise, and also by starting small with a more basic version of the watch that you eventually aspire to own, you give yourself the time to understand and appreciate the watch, see if you actually love it, and if that grail piece is really something you want to spring for. Understand the nuance and learn the nuance between the watches, all the different dial variations or the years or, the different elements of the watches as they progress over the years if it's within a specific model. And you're giving yourself time to kind of grow and understand exactly what you want. And by starting at a smaller price point, if you find that, hey, I always dreamed of buying a big crown and you realize that the big crown is just not for you or the Samara's not for you and you love GMTs more, you're able to get out of that watch a lot easier. Right. And it allows you that flexibility. Whereas obviously watches at higher price points can sometimes not be as liquid as watches at smaller price points. There is obviously a much smaller buyer pool as you rise the ranks in terms of price on a watch. Same with any
100%.
Yeah.
And to be honest, sometimes the more expensive watches aren't necessarily more exciting than some of their cheaper variants.
Yeah, you and I both wear very inexpensive watches and get just as excited over them all the
100%.
time. Moving on from starting small, tip number 2 really is centered more around people who are just getting started out. Maybe some people won't agree with this, but I always like new collectors to start off with blue chip watches. Now, by blue chip watches, I'm not just talking about from a specific brand like Rolex. It could be any brand, but within that brand, you want to start off with watches that are very popular and have large commercial appeal, have a large following, have a lot of people online discussing them, so information is easier to come by. But at the end of the day, parroting off of the first tip, if you don't love that watch, you're able to kind of get in and out of it easier. So by buying a blue chip watch, so a Rolex Datejust, an Omega Speedmaster, not some, esoteric model.
Even a Seiko Willard or something like that.
Yeah, something that has large mass appeal. You're giving yourself the opportunity to A, experience, quote unquote, the most popular of what that brand has to offer, and B, you're the ability to understand whether or not you actually like the brand, the model, the watch, the style of watch, and if you don't, you're able to find a large community of people that can help you, guide you through the process of getting something else or understanding what you're actually buying or what you're going to own. And inevitably, if you don't like it, moving on from the watch easier. I love niche watches. I generally tend to collect them. I've been doing this a long time. That being said, the more niche the watch is, the harder it is to resell it. And the smaller the buyer pool is, the smaller amount of people there will be who understand the watch, and the education and information out there on the internet might be less the more niche the watch is. Whereas obviously something like a Submariner or a Speedmaster or a Willard, there's going to be plenty of information out there, plenty of people who could help you, plenty of resources.
And like I said, it doesn't matter the budget. Every budget has sort of its own small community. I know the Seiko community is just as enthusiastic and
if not more,
and more blue chip than sometimes easier to sell than certain Rolex models or whatnot. But so don't be discouraged.
Even using the watch on my wrist as a perfect example, if you wanted to jump into the AP market and you wanted that integrated bracelet sports watch, I would always say in a similar price bracket, go for a Royal Oak over the Square Royal Oak. This watch happens to be a lot more niche. You have to find the buyer who appreciates this quartz era of watch, the size of it, the shape of it, whereas the Royal Oak is much more universally loved and appreciated by people and very well known. So you're going to have a much easier time sourcing the watch, understanding the watch, vetting the watch, and inevitably selling the watch if you don't love it.
Right.
Now, I know these last 2 tips have talked about buying watches kind of safely so that if you want to sell them, you won't have a hard time. But tip number 3 kind of goes against that a little bit. What I like to tell people is that when purchasing a watch, you need to allow yourself time to breathe and time with the watch to really understand if you really love it. I try to explain to people that they really need to purchase a watch with the mindset of holding it for, let's say, a 6-month to 12-month period. The biggest problem I see right now is that a lot of people have watch ADD. I mean, listen, myself included, I can't be a hypocrite, but we are all like squirrels with social media that, we see something and we quickly look and we think we need to have that. And the watch that we just purchased that we might have lusted over for so long and hunted for so long kind of gets thrown by the wayside in lieu of something else. So I think tip number 3 has to be that you have to give yourself time to appreciate the ownership experience with the watch so that you're not just kind of, flipping in and out of it, in a week or a day or whatever.
This is also a financial tip where here at the shop, we see it all the time. People buy a watch and literally the next week, or sometimes even a few days later, they're like, oh, I want to trade this in for something else. And I'm just like, dude, like really?
Right.
And then they get banged on the head when I tell them, I have to take 10% less.
Right, 5-10%, off of what they just paid for it because we have to resell the watch for the same amount,
again. And so a lot of times I see clients lose money and then they do that 3 or 4 times and the amount of money that they lost, compound.
Yeah.
And by that time you could have bought like a whole new watch or the watch you really wanted to in the end. And a lot of times people don't let the watch grow on them enough. They just want the next new thing. They want to get that fix really quickly, where a lot of times if you hold on to a watch, let it grow on you for a little bit, you end up loving it even more than you ever thought.
Yeah, it's just allowing yourself the opportunity to enjoy the ownership experience of the watch. Whereas, you know, kind of if you're talking about like us having to buy back a watch, let's say 95% because somebody wanted something else in a week. Right. Whereas if you did that over a 6 to 12 month period and you really do the math on that, if we're buying a watch back at 95%, their ownership cost over a year is really low versus a week where they could be losing 5-10% just because they moved on to the next thing too quickly.
This is not to say if you really don't like a watch, obviously sell it.
Of course, yeah.
Don't keep a watch you hate.
And I think a lot of the biggest problem is that, you know, watch collecting, unlike something else like, let's say, art collecting or car collecting or even like stamps or baseball cards, are relatively easy to get in and out of. You know, they're relatively liquid, whereas a car, you have registration, shipping, nightmare, insurance, this, that, big, and you're waiting for that buyer for the right price and this and that, and it takes forever, whereas watches are pretty damn easy comparatively speaking. Right. So people are more inclined to kind of traffic in and out of them a lot faster because the ease of doing so is so much greater than other collectibles. That being said, I think everybody needs to take a step back. I've instituted this rule for myself after all these years, almost 20 years of watch buying. I have made it a hard and fast rule for myself now included that it has to be a minimum of 6 to 12 months, that if I buy something for myself, I will absolutely keep it. And that's why in our third safe, you'll see my little collection there. And it stays, you know, I really have been victim to watch ADD myself over the years, and I'm really trying to let myself breathe and also limit the amount of watches in my collection, which I know so many people have asked over the years, show us your collection. It's not that great, people. It's not that great. There's some cool stuff, and it's not like, oh my God. But that being said, I keep it tight, 6 to 12 watches, no more, and I'm trying to really do a good job, and I think I've been doing a good job of like not selling watches in my personal collection for a good amount of time, allowing myself to enjoy that ownership experience.
You've definitely gotten better at it.
Thanks. Yeah. I like to think so. I hope so.
You did.
Maybe.
You did.
Next tip, I mean, we've talked about this so much,
yeah.
But we'd be remiss if we didn't bring it up again, is always pay for quality. Understand what you're purchasing and do not get distracted by trivial pursuits. And a lot of people aren't going to like this, but when I consider trivial pursuits are stuff like birth year watches,
box and papers,
having to have watches with box and papers, and foregoing amazing vintage watch just because it doesn't have the original box and papers, right. And a lot of other things like having to have one specific execution of dial and foregoing an amazing like 10 out of 10 red Submariner because it's not a Mark IV and it's a Mark III or whatever.
I've seen people not buy watches because they didn't have the original crystal,
right.
Which is like
absolutely crazy.
Watch could be stunning, but they didn't buy it because, you know, they want that original crystal.
So obviously, the main tenet is buy quality. Make sure you take your time and find the best example on the market of what you're looking for. Do not settle for an average example. If there are better examples on the market, it is always better in the long run to spend a little bit more money if you could afford it to buy a better quality example. And this doesn't just apply to watches, it applies to pretty much any collectible out there, to buy the better example because it will obviously hold its value better in the long term. It will be more collectible, it will be easier to resell. As you become more educated about the watches, you will appreciate the condition or the superior condition watch much more than the inferior condition. You'll start to understand why collectors are looking for that kind of stuff. Explain to us why we hate some of the trivial stuff such as birth year watches.
Birth year watches are the biggest nightmare because we get it multiple times a week. And a lot of people will forego a watch that is excellent because it's a year or two off of their actual birth year. And the reality is, especially with Rolex, there's no real, I mean, it's an estimate of what year that watch was produced. It's not the sure number that we could put on the date.
The production number lists, even the one on our website, are sometimes different than other production number lists on other websites because Rolex never released this information. It's just kind of collectors and enthusiast resources that have been pulled together to make that list. And then also, you know, sometimes somebody will look at a box and papers and be like, oh, you know, it says 1995 on it. It must have been produced there. And it's like, no, that was when it was sold, not when it was produced. Correct. You know, so you'll never absolutely be sure, especially with Rolex. There are other brands where you could pinpoint it a little better. Omega, Patek,
Omega,
Vacheron, Breguet. Well, they paused their extract department for now, but generally speaking, yes, you could find out the exact year of production. But I completely 100% agree with you. We'll present the client with, let's say he's looking for a birth year date just, and we'll present him one that's 1 year off from his birth year, but that is a 10 out of 10 condition, and then the actual birth year watch that is 7 out of 10 condition, and they will forego the better watch because this one fits within a specific year of when they were born. I always found that to be such a fallacy.
So silly.
You know,
And same with boxing papers too. You can't wear the boxing papers, guys. You're not going to go out with the boxing papers to a watch collector's meeting and say, look, like I have the boxing papers.
Right.
Nobody gives a shit.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we are talking obviously about building vintage watch collection. As it relates to modern watches, I always preach that you probably should be getting the original card or paper.
Yeah.
Right.
Even with modern watch collecting, whatever you pay for boxing papers, you're going to pay a premium for it. You're going to get that out, you know, when you sell the watch.
Right.
But that discounted price might be worth it just to not have the boxing papers.
But with modern watches, though, a lot of people shy off from buying the watch altogether because it doesn't have the box and papers. That's the only thing you need to consider. With vintage, there's always a market with or without box and papers. I just never, in my own personal collecting, had to have a watch just because it had box and papers. If it has it, it's great. It's a nice bonus. But I'm always picking out the watch that speaks to me, that's in excellent condition, that's rare, etc., regardless of whether it has box and papers or not. There are way too many new collectors who think that they have to buy a vintage watch that has box and papers because it either validates the watch or it's worth more, or that's what everybody is after, and that's absolutely not true. There are plenty of people who absolutely adore box and papers, and we have some clients who only buy box and papers watches, but they're generally the exception, not the norm.
Correct.
If you're new to vintage watch collecting, do not make the mistake of thinking that you have to buy a watch with box and papers or it's not worth buying at all. Correct. In addition to always looking for the best quality vintage watch, one of the biggest mistakes we see people making all the time is following trends. Again, I'm not trying to be hypocritical because sometimes a watch will get really popular online or in collecting circles and it will kind of re-gear my brain, be like, actually, you know what, I really like that watch, you know, and I will kind of fall for it as well. That being said, where we find watch trends and hype watches, we see markets rise really fast and fall really fast. We've seen it so many times and it's very unstable to buy into hype watches. So for the new collector, I would strongly advise staying away from watches that you are seeing propped up on the market and talked about a lot as the next latest and greatest thing, and some celebrity wears it and everybody wants it. Those watches also tend to be more niche, and which goes against tip number 2, which was kind of stick in your early days of collecting to blue chip watches. These hype watches tend to be smaller market watches that everybody wants for a very short period of time. The prices skyrocket, and then once the fad is kind of over, people are kind of over it, the prices start coming down as more and more kind of enter the market. So that would be, I think, tip number 5 that people really need to think long and hard about, especially in the early days of collecting.
I think it even goes beyond that, where like the big thing now is men wearing ladies' watches, you know, smaller watches. And I almost compare it to like Jenko jeans, where it's like, look at pictures of yourself, you know, 20 years ago with huge, giant, baggy jeans, and look in yourself in the mirror and say, was that a good look? You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that men, I'm not saying that men can't wear ladies' watches, but I think that that's a fad that's gonna go away. You know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think you're right, and I think it kind of works on both extremes of the aisle, like where men wearing a tiny, tiny, tiny ladies' watch and also wearing this ginormous, you know, 50 millimeter sea dweller.
Right.
It's kind of finding that sweet spot. But also, you know, once you see a watch really catching heat because a lot of people on the internet are talking about it or celebrities wearing it, you really need to think long and hard whether you actually like that watch because you genuinely like it or because you see it being promoted all over social media. Like, take a step back and think about it. You know, really think about it. Am I being influenced? Like, is this watch worth the price that's now being asked of it because people are considering it? You know, and I'm not trying to, like, for example, shit on Cartier, you know, because the first thing that comes up to my mind in the past, let's say 4 or 5 years, has been Cartier, where vintage Cartier no one used to care about, and now it is everywhere. Vintage tanks, vintage Centrays, vintage crashes, everything. Any popular model of Cartier has skyrocketed. Me personally, there are a lot of models that I'm fond of, but I would not personally pay new prices for it. Now, that's just me. But as a new collector, I think you really need to try to avoid buying into those trends and hype models because you kind of really don't know what you like yet. And those watches tend to be niche. And it really sucks when you buy into a trend or a hype at the top of the market and then the market just falls out. It kind of takes the taste away of wanting to collect and enjoy watches, you know?
100%.
Because we can't separate the financial aspect of owning watches. Like, as much as I would love to say, like, the money doesn't matter. The money doesn't matter, you just have to love the watch. That's bullshit. It's bullshit, because if you buy a watch for $10,000 and then 2 months later everybody moves on and it's worth $3,000, your desire to buy watches and collect kind of gets hurt, you know, for sure. It will. It's just human nature. And which leads us to our last tip, and it might seem a little contradictory after we just ranted about not buying into hype watches and trendy watches, etc. But at the end of the day, everything we said is almost irrelevant. You have to like what you buy. I always tell people, you are the person who has to live with the watch. You are the person who has to sit down and look at it, and whenever you are wearing it, sure, you could share it with people on social media and get the likes and the comments and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, none of that matters, because you are the one who owns it. You have to love it. You are spending your hard-earned money on it. So it really doesn't matter what I say, it doesn't matter what Jordan says, and it doesn't matter what anybody on the internet says. If you love the watch, buy the watch and enjoy it. Just, I would say, consider everything we said before. If you're new to this, focus on maybe narrowing in on stuff that's a little more commercial to start, you know, if you can, if that's what you want. Do your research, do your education, buy best quality. But at the end of the day, you have to love the watch that you're buying, or else none of this matters. It has to be fun.
Our first few tips are really aimed for the new vintage collector, or really the new watch collector, period. Whereas this last tip is really meant for everybody.
Yeah, it's a reminder for everybody. Honestly, like, at the end of the day, this is supposed to be a fun hobby. It's supposed to bring us all together. We're supposed to enjoy it. These are non-essential luxury goods that none of us really need. You know, we needed them back in the day when this was a really true tool and an instrument to tell time, to time an event, to understand a depth gauge or this or that, or, you know, whatever you needed the watch for. At the end of the day, our phones tell our time better and do everything that we would need out of a watch. We do this because we love it. We love the creativity behind watches. We love the ingenuity. We love the history. We love the stories. We love the ownership experience. We love the community. So at the end of the day, you really need to buy what you love and not really get so bogged down into other people's opinions. We just made a long video telling you what we think you should be doing, but at the end of the day, you are the one that needs to make that decision for yourself, and we hope that this journey you are about to embark on, or have already embarked on, is an enjoyable one, and that you love it as much as we do.
Keep it fun, guys.
Keep it fun. Keep it fun. Well, guys, that about wraps it up on this video of our tips for collectors new and old. If you have any tips of your own that you think we should hear, please let us know in the comments. This is always a community-driven project, so we want to hear from you as well. And if you have any other video ideas of kind of topics similar to this that you want to hear us discuss, also let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your feedback. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.